Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the podcast where I, Gooey, rank all of the dungeons in the Legend of Zelda series. This week, we are grabbing our last medallion from the Spirit Temple. While we've had other dungeon encounters connected to the characters we've previously allied with in the game, what makes the Spirit Temple so interesting is we are actually attacking Ganondorf on his own turf. The Spirit Temple lies in the territory of the Gerudo people, of which Ganondorf is their leader. The Spirit Temple has been acting as one of his bases of operations. We gain entrance to the dungeon after agreeing to work with one of his subjects, Nabooru, who has turned against him. And the setting to match this is marvelous. The Gerudos, being a desert-dwelling people, have constructed this temple around what is called the Desert Colossus. This glorious giant statue with its arms extended. Contained within the dungeon is another one of these statues too. It's a statue twofer. And with the whole vibe inside the dungeon, it does a good job of having a sort of desert palace kind of thing, including there's like a unique enemy, the Anubis. But on top of that, it has a variety of enemies that have appeared throughout the game, sort of lending itself to being like the baddie hideout. The music has a pretty cool desert, maybe like Egyptian sort of vibe. It's certainly one of the coolest themes in the series for a dungeon. The most standout element of the dungeon, though, is, of course, what everyone knows about it, the fact that it must be explored both as an adult and as a child. It's kind of a natural evolution from the previous dungeon. If you completed them in the same order as me, I should say, that would be the previous dungeon. It can only be reached first as an adult, ideally using the Lens of Truth, which you obtained as a child. Once you get there, it becomes apparent that you don't have the ability to progress into the dungeon without the Silver Gauntlets. This requires you to go back to the past, journey through one portion of the dungeon to obtain the gauntlets, and then go back to the future and complete another half of the dungeon. It's a pretty neat concept. I do wish it was explored a little bit more with the dungeon design, but as it is, the dungeon is split into two halves, the child portion and the adult portion, with one giant room with the Desert Colossus in the middle, intertwining these two parts. These two halves are pretty straightforward and both kind of feel like two mini dungeons put together. There's not a lot of intermingling between the past and present portions or whatever. You know, there's a few puzzles in there that are pretty clever and some memorable moments, and there are some that aren't as exciting. It's sort of a mixed bag in that regard, though I think it leans more towards fun and memorable, of course. You do have a nice mix of all your items used throughout the game in some unique ways too. With that and the new items you receive, the Silver Gauntlets, which are more an item to gate off the adult half, and that's fine. But then you get the Mirror Shield, and it's fairly neat itself, I would say. The dungeon establishes by shining light on the sun faces, it activates them like switches. After gaining the Mirror Shield there's a puzzle where you use mirrors to reflect light onto a sun face, and it lowers the platform into the room with the giant statue, and use the light from that to shine upon the face of the statue, which opens the path to the boss. It feels strange that works. Not sure what the face is like made out of, but it like dissolves when the light hits it. Navi's hint is just that it's like evil looking. I guess I'll take that though, because I like that being like slightly obscure as opposed to one like her just being like, it looks like we should shine some light on it. I mean, it's fairly obvious, you know, you've been using the light, you know, shining on sun faces and whatnot, so it thematically makes sense. I like it. It's a nice little set piece. There is one other enemy now worth mentioning here, the Iron Knuckle. It's good to see them back. These fellas kind of bookend the adult and child portions of the dungeon. They're kind of your last test to obtain an item they're guarding. And I've gotten pretty good at fighting them myself, so they don't really give me too much trouble. But their strikes pack a huge punch, and they could probably be pretty difficult for a new player. Another cool aspect about them is they're kind of tied to the story told throughout the dungeon. You defeat one as a child. Out there, we bear witness to our new ally, Nabooru, being abducted by two witches. As an adult, just before the boss chamber, we have a run-in with these two witches, and they sick another iron knuckle at us, and it's a pretty cool cutscene. I do really enjoy it. After defeating it, though, it's revealed to actually be Nibiru under some sort of mind control spell. So I think that's cool, like a nice little, narrative that plays out throughout the child and adult portions of the dungeon. We've seen that a little bit before in previous dungeons and previous games, but this one feels even more complex, and it'll certainly influence later dungeons, so that's pretty cool. This really serves to hype up our final encounter in the dungeon with these two witches, who are the Sorceress Sisters, Twin Rova. They're two individual beings, sorceresses of fire and ice. One shoots flaming attacks at us, and the other shoots freezing ones, and there's a sort of nod to maybe Trinix from A Link to the Past, where you have to hit the other one with the other element. This can be a little frustrating. Like, I feel like on the N64, I don't know. The controls just don't feel totally great, but this last time that I just played, I did it perfectly, so I don't know. Sometimes I struggle, and sometimes it's extremely easy. So I don't know about that, but it's a big memorable fight. So I'm not gonna knock it, because it's also cool in the second portion. They kind of come together and make a giant sorceress who shoots alternating attacks at us, and the trick is to absorb 3 of the same type of attack at the same time and send it back at her. And, doing that, we're going to be able to vanquish the sorceress. And upon defeat, there's like a fairly funny cutscene of the two of them arguing, which I love. They're arguing about like who's older, even though they're twins. Good gag. And then we're reunited with Nibiru, who, of course, she turns out to be the final sage we're seeking out. She is maybe like interested in Link, which is okay. And either way, she grants us the Spirit Medallion, which ultimately that's preparing us to finally take on Ganondorf. But we have a couple things we need to do before we do that. First of all, we gotta rank this dungeon. So it's not my favorite dungeon in Ocarina of Time, but it creates a nice setting, and it has some cool puzzles and challenges and memorable moments. And I do like it's kind of cool in a way that the adult and child parts don't intersect, because I like how they have like one axis kind of like, here, remember all these puzzles from being a child of lighting torches and holding down switches or whatever, and it's kind of a memorable like last run as a child, and then you pop up on the hand, and you get a little speech there from Kippora Gabora, who talks about how much you've grown, and then you kind of do the other side and pop out on the hand as an adult. And I feel like it's meant to kind of like I don't know, there's some sort of thematics there. I don't know what it is, but it kind of works. I think later we'll see in Ages like a dungeon that's like time traveling back and forth, which I think is neat. I think they could have done something with that here, but I don't know, maybe that was intentional. But again, like, I think some of those puzzles, and I think that story they tell in here does a lot for it. I think this acts, whether you do this, I think this you could do before the Shadow Temple, but I think it works as kind of like a big last dungeon before Ganon. So I think with the story and meeting Ganondorf's minions and stuff like that, it really stands out in that regard. So I feel pretty good about it. Looking at my list and looking at the dungeons, like I'm gonna focus in on the Ocarina of Time dungeons for a second. I think the Fire Temple was another Gauntlet dungeon that I think made great use of its thematics, and I think this is slightly better, I want to say. Yeah, definitely slightly better. I think the Fire Temple could have had some really cool navigation puzzles, but it kind of blew it. So I'll at least put it above that. And then we're in kind of an area that I could see it landing in. How about inside the Deku Tree? That's fairly, it's obviously fairly linear in a tutorial, but I just think it really stands out with the one puzzle, and its simplicity works for it really well. Could I go above that or below it? We can work up, and then we'll get there, because I think I could say that I like this better than Turtle Rock in A Link to the Past. Kind of mixed on that one, Tail Cave, fairly simple. I can put it above that. Hyrule Castle, it's similar concept. It's more about the theming to me, and I think this is better than that. Angler's Tunnel is good. I might bump that one up, but we'll see. I'll put it in Face Shrine. I can put that definitively above Face Shrine. Okay, so we're at Deku Tree. I think I'll put it above the Deku Tree. I think I'll put it above Swamp Palace. And Key Cavern, I actually really like. I kind of like the navigation and stuff like that. Let's have it break the top 10. I'll put it above Key Cavern for now. And we'll see how we feel about it. I'm starting to feel more comfortable about the flexibility of the list, but I do feel pretty strongly about this one. I don't think it's necessarily as good as it could be, but I do think it's a nice, cool, big set piece. And top 10 for now feels like where it ought to be. So speaking of moving things around, I am gonna, before we go to the final dungeon, I am going to cover Gerudo Training Grounds. I don't know if it even really qualifies to be on the list, but I think it'll be a good chance to, audit the list and kind of see there's some dungeons I feel like I want to move a couple places and stuff like that. So, good showing for the Spirit Temple, and we will see you next week, and we're going to get prepared for the finale.